So good evening, everyone, and welcome. This is the second session of our Coach Connect Spring webinar series. I'm your host this evening. My name is Stephen Maxwell. I'm the Coach Education Manager with Cricket Ireland. I have a very special guest this evening. It's Brian Allen from the Northwest Cricket Union. And Brian's going to be our expert for this evening's session. And we're looking at session plan and design. So good evening, Brian. How are you?
Fine, Stephen. Thanks for bringing me on. Hello, everybody. Hopefully I can be of some use, and hopefully you find information we've got useful.
So thanks for joining us, everyone. We've got a few people on the call tonight, so thank you. Just to let you know, we're going to record this and we'll probably drip feed it over the course of the next few weeks and months. So session plan design. So we've got a few learning outcomes for tonight's webinar. So what we're looking to get through tonight and what we hope you guys will learn by the end of this. So we'll identify the requirements for session planning. We'll look at how to apply coaching considerations to your session planning, and then how you can employ reflective practice to support your session planning. Okay, so there are learning outcomes for tonight, and hopefully we can tick all those off for you as we go through the next 60 minutes. So before we get started, if everybody could just open up their chat box, and it'd be just great to know where everybody is tonight and what do you currently coach at? So what level do you currently coach at? So Brian, do you want to start us off? What level you're currently coaching at?
At the minute, I'm doing a few. If you can see that list below, I'm actually doing a few of those at the minute. Club coaching hasn't really started for me yet. I'm doing some primary school coaching, which is pretty much the 9 to 11-year-olds is most of the group. I'm doing some regional senior coaching, which is for the Northwest Women's group and the under-17s. They're bunched together. So at the minute, so week by week, that's the two groups I'm finding myself with, along with some secondary schools. That's usually year 8 and 9 at the minute, which is part of our school program.
Fantastic, Brian. And anybody else on the call then, what level are you currently coaching at yourselves? If you want to take the time to type it into chat, it'd be great to hear what groups you're currently working with. Myself now, I'm only starting off my journey in cricket coaching. Obviously, I'm the education manager, so my job is to design coach education. That's not always sport specific. It's relating to mentoring and along those lines. So Christina, thanks for sharing. So she's working with primary school kids up to under 17s. That's absolutely fantastic with Clontarf Cricket Club. We've got Chris, who's with Limerick CC, and he's working with under 18s. That's fantastic, Chris. So thank you guys for sharing. Sarfraz is with the 15s and below. Again, we've got a few youth coaches on the call tonight. That's absolutely fantastic, guys. Hopefully we can get a lot of learning points for you and a few nuggets of information as well. Okay, so session planning, we've got a bit of a definition here for you all this evening, okay? So session planning, it's an organized description of the activities and resources you'll use to guide a group towards a specific learning objective. So with any session planning, you have an objective. So when you're writing the plan, there's an objective to the plan, okay? So we're going to take you through a course of events tonight, and hopefully we can tick off all these boxes. So quick task. So I don't know about you, Brian, but usually when I'm planning, if it's pre-season, I spend about a week planning my year. If it's from session to session, I plan probably about 60 minutes. So to the audience here tonight, how much time do you currently spend designing or planning your session? So if you want to write it in minutes, whether it's 0 or as many minutes as you like, it'd be great to hear what you guys are at the moment. Brian, what about yourself? Do you spend much time planning your sessions?
Yes and no. I'm going to give you a grey answer in a way. It depends on exactly who or what and where I'm coaching. And well, it also, for me, it depends on how much experience I have in that field. So in the likes of primary schools, I almost have access to, I don't know, 10 or 12 sessions in my head that can go either way. So whenever you do land, I know I've been taking over some of Davy's sessions recently, so I didn't quite know what I was stepping into, and I didn't want to, I suppose, make them do something that was beneath them in a way, or they felt it was beneath them. So I almost went in with a list of 4 things that I could do, and based on their answers to the questions, I suppose, to start, then I sort of picked one that I thought was appropriate. Differently in the, let's say, the women's stations, they're completely planned, not minute by minute, but almost. They'll have a set structure of what I hope the night might look like. Doesn't always go that way, but that's perfect, because that means that either we've had a challenge that's too tough and we need to spend more time there, or we've got a challenge that's too easy and we need to change it. So yeah, we'll have a general theme for those sessions, but it's definitely much more planned than the primary school. But
thanks for sharing, Brian. So we've got a few words in here. So someone's 30 minutes in a week based on the age group and the levels, which is fair enough. Planning at the start of the season. So 40 minutes planning each session throughout the season, which is pretty good. 40 minutes, that's, in a busy life, 40 minutes is a lot of time. So fair play. Including ways to adapt the session depending on the numbers in attendance. Again, that's a great answer. Christina, 10 to 30 minutes, sometimes have a rough plan and adapt on the day. So there's a bit of flexibility in the planning. That's brilliant. So thanks for sharing, guys. And thanks again for sharing as well, Brian. So when we think of planning, it's only one of our roles and responsibilities as a coach, Brian. So and we'll ask the group as well who are on the call tonight to use the chat function here again. So what is your role as a coach and what is your responsibility as a coach? So if you guys want to throw them into the chat, and then myself and Brian will talk through them. So Brian, what is your role as a coach?
It's similar to my first answer in a way. We're going to have, it'll depend on what I'm there for, what I suppose the group would expect or want from my input. So and I'll go for the school setting first. My role there is to really sell the game of cricket and make it really a really enjoyable activity to be at, because it's going to be competing with lots of other sports. But so my role there is to make sure there's no one standing around not doing anything at any time, and making sure it's as inclusive as possible. But that role changes depending on your environment. Obviously, that all still exists. We want people to have as much fun and inclusion as possible. But I suppose as I move up the levels, they're almost there for different reasons. In schoolyard, they don't always want to be there. Whereas in the regional program stuff, I really hope they really want to be there. So where you're coming there is more of a coach that would challenge them and make things, not always make things tough, but find challenges where they can find the answer. And almost be the person there who's there to raise the bar or to lower the bar if required, but just to try and make sure that success is there and learning definitely takes place.
Brilliant. We've got some answers coming in there. So the first one's actually a brilliant answer there from Emma, providing a safe environment. So obviously as a coach, would you say that's a role or a responsibility, Brian? Providing a safe environment.
It's probably going in both. I suppose you're definitely going to be responsible for safety, because if anything happens, it's that's why we pay our insurance, I suppose, because that's definitely a responsibility. But I suppose as a trait, if I think of a role as a trait you would have as a player or as a coach, it's probably for me now fitting more into the responsibility end. It's just because I'm almost thinking of the list of roles you may have. It's almost a descriptive word of a person, for me, that is. But it's just making, that's going to be something that's throughout every single thing you do, making sure that whatever you do in that station is safe. So it's a key aspect.
Some other ones coming through from everybody there: making it fun, a safe environment, keeping the session active, keep the interest up, which you've mentioned already, inspiring the next generation, we've touched on as well, inclusive environment, responsibilities, then we're going to come on to them in a sec. Pass on my experience, make sure it's fun, everyone comes away learning something. That's absolutely fantastic, guys. Thanks for sharing through the chat there. So some of the other roles of a coach, as what we're going to talk through tonight, obviously, is being a planner, a facilitator of learning, providing a provider of knowledge, which has come through the chat, a delegator, a dictator at times, depending on the age group, of course, and then, as mentioned, a facilitator of practice. So then in relation to the responsibilities as a coach, we've got a few of them here, Brian, if you want to focus on one or two of them there.
Yeah, so I suppose it's a lot of these are probably looking at what type of environment you're trying to create in your session. So as you can see with everything listed there, that'll probably point towards an environment that is pretty fun. And well, obviously fun's got loads of different meanings, but it'll be quite engaging for everyone involved. And that means the responsibility of the coach, they can pretty much keep an eye during the session to see is this session going right? And is everyone probably having as much, we'll call it fun, that they could be having? And is I suppose like the level of challenge there, is it there to keep them enthused and all the rest? So there's loads. There's
No,
loads
that's
there.
pretty, that's
Yeah.
brilliant, Brian. And in fairness, some of the stuff coming through the chat, and we've got one there on responsibility, so safety, which we've touched on, and maximum engagement, which creates fun as an outcome in relation to that. So moving on then, our why. Okay, so when we're thinking of planning, everyone, the reason behind our planning, we have to have a why. So why do we coach? So two questions that I feel are essential for laying the foundation for us to be successful in a session or over the course of a season are, why am I doing this? And who am I doing this for? So I don't know if you want to come in on that, Brian. Do you know your why? Do you have a why?
I probably do. It's probably just something that I wouldn't have in the forefront of my mind all the time. But for me, I think the most enjoyable part of coaching is almost understanding, well, not completely understanding, but finding a way of understanding how people learn. Because everyone will learn massively differently. So you may do a really cracking session that and enthuses everybody and it really works, but then you take it into a different environment and it just completely falls on its face. So for me, it just shows you how no matter how well planned some things can be, the people in front of you will make the biggest difference, and maybe just even the language you use may make a big difference to that. So for me, why I'm doing it personally is I actually enjoy the learning that you get through it, because it keeps changing. Like, been coaching for years and it's never the same.
That's fantastic. So I guess that kind of touches on your philosophy, which we're going to come to in a moment. So like in relation to why I'm doing this, so if I'm going to do a battle drill, depending on which kind of drill I'm going to do, I have to have a reason why I'm going to do it with the kids or the adults on that particular time. And then who am I doing it for? The different types of bowling. You know what I mean? If you have a static group in the school, obviously they're going to struggle with spin bowling. So who am I doing this for? I'm doing this for kids. We're going to focus on the very basics. And that's just something I tend to take into all my sessions when I'm going to plan, take into account, right? What am I going to get out of this drill? And then who am I doing this drill for? So going on what you've last spoke on, Brian, we're going to have a quick look at then our philosophy. Okay, so our own personal why we coach. So the reason most people will have a philosophy, they may not understand that, okay, this is my coaching philosophy, but the reason why we go out week on week and do a bit of coaching, it determines your coaching style, it underpins your coaching principles, and it shapes how you communicate and deal with conflicts in sessions. So Brian, would you like to share a little bit about your own coaching philosophy? You touched on it there previously.
Do you know what? I think mine changes. I think it changes all the time, depending on my stage as a coach as well. Because I know at the start, if when I first started coaching, if you asked me my coaching philosophy, it would be very sport related, and try and make people better at sport in general, or cricket or whatever sport it may be at the time. But now it's generally trying to look at the bigger picture, depending on who I'm coaching for at times. So if I'm coaching for the club or I'm coaching for the union, what outcomes they're expecting of me for that input that I've got with the group. So I almost have to morph my philosophy to make sure it fits the environment that I'm coaching in. But personally, off the top of my head, like, it's probably trying to make people the best they can be, and trying to, I suppose, press the right buttons that can challenge them. Challenge them to be better, or challenge them to enjoy sport more, and even physical activity, just people getting involved. And for me, I know, speaking with my union hat on, I'd really obviously love to see the clubs a real vibrant place where people really enjoy coming down, and coaches don't get stressed out too much. They have a lot of help and all. So for me, it's to try and make the coaching itself as enjoyable as possible. So it's enjoyable for both the coach and the participants.
That's pretty. Thanks for sharing, Brian. That's pretty brilliant. And you're going into some kind of feelings as well in relation to your philosophy. And like yourself, my philosophy changed. So when I first started, I had a few bad experiences when I was a child with coaches, and I thought, I know I could do a better job, and that was my philosophy. I know I can do a better job, but then over the years, the philosophy changes. And what I tend to do now is at the start of every season, on the front page of my notebook, I write down my why. So why am I coaching this season? What do I want to get out of it? Do I want to be successful? No. Do I want my players to be successful? Yes. And then what does success mean? So then as I'm going throughout the season, I'll hold myself accountable to that front page. And that's what I'll base my philosophy on for that given season. So like you, it changes over time. So that's pretty great. And then I think it's great if we do write down what our philosophy is. Like if we can write it down somewhere, it doesn't have to be in your notebook. It could be on the office wall at home. That we do hold ourselves accountable for our own philosophies, because that's really what dictates how we coach the players today. Um, so moving in on then, and obviously we've talked about our philosophy, and you've touched on again why you coach. What are the needs of our athletes or our players? So everybody that comes to cricket, the cricket club, the school, they all have different reasons for being there. So the kids have reasons and the adults have reasons. So I'll let you lead off on this, Brian. So this is the kids.
Yeah, so I suppose from looking at the chat, most of our coaches are coaching under 17s and below, isn't that right?
Yeah,
It's around that.
that's correct.
All right, so this is really important to try and have a grasp of why we think the kids are there in the first place. So if we can start to understand that, then what we can really do as a coach is shape our sessions to fit what they really want. It may not fit what we want as a coach, because yeah, I know from experience I've had to try like different warm-ups, ones that I suppose for me I wouldn't like to do myself, but they really work for the grips in front. Um, so an example of that is I've had to use like some sort of like vocal warm-ups and stuff for really quiet, like coaching in the girls environment here. Sometimes the kids are very quiet, and getting them just to open up and speak back is a massive thing. So I've had to sort of employ vocal warm-ups, which I stole from EA, Education Authority, pretty much. But for me, I would never have brought that in the past because I just thought that's nothing to do with cricket. But how that really shaped the session is by the end they were talking to each other and they were making friends with people that they had never met before, and they were actually talking back to me, which I really needed, because it's so hard having a quiet group where when you're asking questions, it's okay having your 5 seconds of thinking time, but when it goes 10, 15, 20 of silence, it becomes a wee bit tougher. So yeah, it's understanding why they're there, and then go look if they're there to make friends, then you try and make as much opportunity for them to interact as possible. And if they're there to get better, then you obviously add as much challenge as possible, but trying to differentiate within that so they can challenge and compete against others, or they could challenge and compete against themselves. It just completely depends on what you think they need. And if you could ask them somehow, you could just be as blatant with even in your wee one-on-one conversations during the session. Like that's like gold dust, finding out information and what's going on in each individual's head at that time.
That's brilliant, Brian. And then if anybody would like to come in through the chat, like do as coaches and coaching as youth coaches, do we understand why the kids are coming to us today? So, if there's something that's not on the screen there that you think should be, if you'd like to throw it into the chat and share with everybody, that'd be brilliant. Like we've got ladies coaches here, we've got under 16s, 19s, seniors, youths. So throw us in there. Why do your kids come to your sessions? And while that's happening, Brian, we'll flick on to adults and why they come and the difference then between the kids.
Yeah, I suppose for this group of coaches on here, because we're probably getting towards the older end of your scale, so if you go from the under 15s to 19s, there's almost a real temptation to treat them as adults. Now some players, depend on their stage of development, are very close to being pretty much, and probably works well treating like adults. But it's probably then for the coach to understand what the difference is when you are, um, treating them like you would coach an adult situation. So I suppose we're looking for what their fun might be is completely different on what other people's fun might be. And here's my first visitor. Sorry about that.
That's all right, Brian.
All right. So, but it's just looking at the adults, the adult situation, and and seeing they're going to be different than what the kids are, and you can see, what these girls think are fun isn't probably what I would think is fun at the same time. You might guess.
That's brilliant, Brian. So, just kind of summing up what Brian's touching on there. So we've got the kids now, and obviously there's a difference then between the boys and the girls in relation to the kids coming. If we look at the research done recently by Sport Ireland, if you ask a girl and a boy, and this is based on the average, the girls will say they're coming for fun, enjoyment, and to develop, and then the boys, their number one would be for the competitive side of things. So we do need to understand those differentiations then as well, not just in the age groups. And then for the adults, I know the last cricket session I went to last week, last Saturday, which was indoors, it was fun and enjoyment. But by the end of it, because we're all adults, it got very competitive, even though it was only a mess around, so to speak. So that, basically knowing and understanding the adults or the kids that are coming to our sessions makes a massive difference to our planning as well. So thanks for sharing, Brian. So coaching children, Brian, the fundamentals. We've got a few golden rules here. There's 10 of them. Obviously everybody can just read through them themselves, but is there any of them there, Brian, that really stand out for you in relation to coaching children?
Well, they're all as important as each other in this list. This here comes from a website, I Coach Kids, if I'm right. So I know this is part of the Cricket Ireland coaching kids course as well. It's actually on the booklet as well. But there's probably, it's hard to single one out, because if you look at one, you think, oh gee, that's important. There's none here that's is not here on merit. But if you see, for me, like using different coaching methods to enhance learning, I like that, because it's the rest of it's all obviously dealing with the players in front, but with the using different coaching methods, what you're starting to look at then is different methods of learning. So some people like to be told what to do and can just follow instruction, while others will need to see it. It's like really see a good model of it happening. So you may have to demo yourself, or you may have to get somebody really good in the group. And then you may also have others who do not want to be letting anybody else see them practice something that they're not good at, because they know they're going to fail a bit. So for myself as a coach, especially coaching in the younger, well, especially coaching everyone, if someone is probably going to fail in the session, even right up to the top level where you're trying to make them fail, I suppose, is trying to find a comfort zone where they can go, right, I'm happy to fail here in front of, either make sure everyone's busy so nobody sees what they're up to, or find a way of making it as comfortable as possible. So for me, it's trying to find different, is using different methods within that one station, of really helping everyone understand what's going on. So obviously questioning's a big part of that as well, and just really getting into the kid's head and making sure they know where you are.
I think that was a fantastic point to hit on there, Brian, because I know myself, I learn by actually physically doing something, whereas I find it hard to read or listen and take it all in. So if I'm either visually watching you do something, demonstrating, or me participating, I'm able to take it in much quicker, no matter how much I study for my exams. So that's brilliant. And in fairness, I'm sure most of them would still apply to coaching adults as well, but we'll take a look at that as well for everybody.
Right, see, if I just go back to one more one,
Yeah,
it's probably the toughest one in that to work with, and it's engaging parents in a positive and constructive manner, like number 7. It's probably it's something that no coaching manual will have, but it's something that's really important for the kids' development, because we may have the kids, I don't know, 1, 2 hours, 3 hours a week or whatever, but the parents having the rest. So it's almost, if we can have the parents really supportive of what the coaches are doing and what the program's doing, then it makes their I suppose will they learn that much easier to go. I don't have any golden nuggets of how to do that, but I think it's just including them in everything that you do and making them as welcome as possible, especially in the club's environment.
No,
Parents,
that's a
yeah.
great point, Brian, and you're completely right. I've never seen that in a coaching manual in any sport. So, there's one nugget of information. If anybody has the answer, feel free to share. So thanks for that one, Brian. So we'll move on then to coaching adults, which most of these coaches may move on to at some stage, as they're
Yeah.
currently at youth level.
Yeah, so coaching adults, so you're going to now start to see obviously people who are coming to sport for different reasons. And as we said with the coaching kids, if we can understand why they're there in the first place, that'll really help. So the very first line, like, including moderate to appropriate exercise loads. Some people, that may be their physical activity outlet for the week, and if they spend most of it standing around, it's fairly likely after a few weeks they're not going to get maybe the fitness levels they want to achieve from it, or maybe the body shape or whatever it might be. So it may be adding in different physical challenges within their group. Maybe making the likes of warm up a bit tougher, and in every aspect of the game, just raising the bar on the heart rate, I suppose. So knowing that market. Whereas if you're coaching a group of adults who are there to get better and win games, then they're probably going to come and have done their fitness somewhere else, and going to really use your input as a coach to really home in on what they may do tactically or technically, and really maybe make one a priority. Or so it's one of those answers where I'm going to give you it depends on really what you think they need and what they want from the session. So you can see from this here that there's a load, and the awareness in male and female athletes, like that changes all the time. Because like I know for me, I'm only coaching women's sport for this is probably my third year, I would say. But every year I'm learning more and more. At the start, it was definitely outside my comfort zone, I must say, because I just thought coach as usual, but it wasn't just it's not like the boys, because the boys know all the answers. So they say, where the girls probably know the answer but just wouldn't tell you. So for me, it's probably just finding that zone.
Yeah, I suppose from my own experience, Brian, from differentiating between coaching boys and girls and coaching men and women, for me, like the boys and girls just want to have fun. The men and women, the men will probably tell you you're doing it right or wrong, but for the women, I've always found it that it's the most challenging, and in a positive way. They make me a better coach. So I'm always in my planning writing down exactly why I'm going to do something, because the girls or the women will ask me, well, Stephen, why are we doing this tonight? How is it going to help us to develop? So, it is a brilliant learning environment to be around. So that's pretty great. So obviously this is a session planning webinar, but what we're going to look at now is the pros and cons for planning. Okay, so there's a few of them for both. And we're going to look at them all here. So first of all, the pros of planning. So why should we be planning, Brian?
I think nobody wants to turn up this session where the coach just looks at everyone blankly going, what do we do? I think that's the real other end of the stick, I suppose, where it's really unplanned and nobody knows what's going on. But I think for smoothness, to making sure there's no dead time, and dead time I mean by nobody just standing around doing nothing, then if you plan, for me, you're going to be much more efficient with your time. So if you have a 2-hour session, which I know in many of my sessions at the minute, 2 hours is almost not long enough by the time you get everything going. But if they weren't planned, your 2-hour session then becomes an hour and a half, because you've lost maybe over the time 30 minutes of nothing, which you really don't want. And we can't afford it as coaches, and the players definitely can't afford it. So So as you can see in this list here, so it'll depend on how much planning you have to do. For me, it depends on who your coaching team is as well. So if they're a new team to you and don't really know what the plans for that group are, then like sharing that vision of what the session should or could look like is really important, and probably needing more detail. Whereas if that coach has worked with you quite a bit before, you can probably go the general themes route, but it depends on how much information that you need or they need.
Brilliant, brilliant. So that's kind of the pros of it. So the plan A and plan B, because obviously if it's not going to plan as such, do you have a plan B ready? Timings obviously is very important, and you've already mentioned keeping the parents on side. So from my own point of view, now I don't have any kids myself at the moment, but I have 3 nieces, and I know my brother is a stickler on this one. So if the coach tells him to pick up the kids at 1 o'clock, the kids need to be ready at 1 o'clock. So in relation to our timings, starting point and end point are very important from the parents' point of view, I suppose. So we look at the cons now, and with anything there is pros and cons. So why do we need to plan a session, Brian?
Well, the cons if we're looking at, so obviously we're looking at the plan of session and we have everything set out by the minute. But if we're well enough planned and probably had a bit more experience, then we will have our plan B, plan C, possibly even plan D in our head for things that may happen. So if we have a plan and go, right, we're sticking to this no matter what happens in front of us, what we really need to be as coaches is really flexible on what we see in front of us. So if someone's or a group is struggling or find things too easy, then if our plan says we stick at that, then we probably shouldn't. We should probably go, right, I need to make this tougher by doing whatever, or moving on to something else. Sometimes the sessions you probably have an idea of the theme you want, but sometimes you go in a slightly different way because that group, the group seems to have needed that more than maybe what you'd planned originally. So I think it's almost planned, but plan to be flexible.
No, that's fair enough. And obviously the big one then, I suppose everybody is very busy nowadays. It is very time consuming. I know myself, I usually build it into my lunchtime, so it's not very healthy. I'm planning and I'm eating at the same time, so I'm not enjoying my food. So that's unhealthy, so to speak. And you're totally right there. The flexibility is so important. I know from my own point of view, coaching adults, in pre-season we usually have it very structured. Obviously it's flowing through the session, you know what I mean? We're moving from 1 to 2 drill, and it's short and sharp. But then when it comes to in season and we're going from Saturday games or Sunday games every week, we put a lot of flexibility then into our training session, because oh well, this didn't work in the game last week, so we're going to focus on this in training. So we have that flexibility, and we'll put it to the players. Is there anything you'd like to improve on? And we'll build that into the training session. So I think it's very important to have that flexibility there. You're totally right.
Just to see that which might help on the time consuming part. What I tend to do, and that's just what I do. I usually put most of my sessions on on the computer somehow, and they're generally saved under a general theme. So what you then have is whenever that theme comes back up and when that next group needs it, then you have a template of what you've done in the past, and you've also got reflection of how that worked for that group that you had then. So you could probably go, is it a cut and paste job, or is it I can take elements of this session that I've already done in the past, and then just pretty much rejig it a bit to fit the current group. So
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. I may start using my Microsoft Word more often. I use Excel and I don't usually save my session plans, so that's probably a problem for me. So definitely something I'll take on board anyway, Brian. So then things to consider in relation to when we're planning. If you want to, I'll flick through these, Brian, if you want to pick out some points and share them with the group.
Yeah, so there's quite a lot of things to consider. So the first one, does a session allow players succeed most of the time? So I think anybody probably would admit that you feel much better whenever things go well. And whenever you're providing challenge, if there's no success at all on that challenge, then it's almost going to go right. They may never touch that skill again. or they may take a while to come back to it. So what you're looking for is to find ways that people can succeed. But depending on what they're there for is how hard you're going to not push them, but maybe pull them on how challenging it can be. So when you're flowing from task to task, generally you'll have themes. You may have a warm up, you may have a general theme for the session, then you may have a game at the end. So it's trying to work in times of how you as a coach are going to transition from your warm up to your theme to your game. That's just an example. So you'll probably start to look at going, well, what am I doing when they're doing the warm up that's really going to save time for us to move into the theme? You may be walking around, your assistants may be walking around, setting up the next part, or it may be set up, if you've big enough space, it may be set up separately. So it just depends on what works, but it's just trying to find out that can you really maximize your time with the players so they're not walking about and waiting for things to be set up.
Just on that last point then, Brian, so things to consider, what are the program, environment and player needs, if you want to touch on that first?
Yeah, so that's something I probably touched on a tiny bit at the start. So it depends on where you're coaching. So a lot of us are club coaches and coaching in different things. The club will probably have a vision of what they want coming through at the age group. Your club may have a way of playing, like depending, it could be depending on what your grounds are like. I know in the Northwest we have grounds that are sometimes a wee bit smaller, so you'll see a trait from players coming from that club that they'll like to whack 6s and 4s because that's really beneficial for their environment that they're in. So a lot of their players, their kids and stuff, will grow up knowing we want to be taught how to whack it, essentially. Yeah, so but that's one example of the program that a club may run. If you're working for the regions, or if you're working for maybe higher performance or whatever, then you'll probably know, like, by age 15, here's the general player traits that we're looking for, here's the skills that they should hopefully master. So you as a coach, you're probably going, right, as a coach now, I need to shape my sessions to make sure they get enough of these activities to be better. And then the participants in it, just as we talked about, why they're there in the first place. If they're there to enjoy it and just be a social cricketer or sportsman or woman, or if they're there to play for Ireland, then you'll probably coach those two athletes differently, and challenge them differently. And then the last one was an event. So maybe you're working up to maybe a club cup final, or possibly even a tour. So what you'll do is make sure your sessions make sure the players are in the best possible position for that event, so that you've covered everything you want to cover, maybe, and readdressed it a few times as well, so they can really access the working memory and what they've got. And by the time your tournament or event comes up, then everything's sorted and everything's ready to rock, hopefully.
Brilliant. Thank you, especially those last 3 points. I think it hits home for the age groups we're working at. So a few more things to consider, guys, when we're focused on our planning. And Brian has touched on this already. So is it more than just cricket? Like, especially everybody on the call tonight is working with youth groups. So, like, I've learned most of my life lessons through sport. I learn right and wrong. I learn how to follow rules or bend them when it comes to if the umpire isn't looking in the right direction. You know, your children are learning to lead by playing through the sport. And there's a few really good ones there, Brian. I don't know if you want to talk through one or two of them there.
Yeah, I suppose what every team will need is leaders. So I suppose in your session, if you need everyone needs captains and vice captains, and even within your batting and bowling units, you'll have small teams that someone will probably take a lead. So I think in your sessions, there's also loads of opportunity to bring in some leadership and decision making. So as a coach, you don't always have to provide the answers. You could just provide challenges and see what answers they come up with. I really like I suppose knowing what good looks like, and sharing the success criteria. So if any given session you go, right, here's what we, just like today, here's our learning examples, or here's our learning outcomes, here's what we're pretty much going to judge you on. So if it is a certain skill, so say it's I don't know, this just says the front foot drive for handiness, and we're only working on our head position for that one session, then whatever else matters, nothing else really mattered in that session, but they'll know that you're only going to mark them on where the head is at that stage. And if that all works well for that session, regardless of the rest, then you'll know that that's what you probably focus on a wee bit better, so they know that's what you're marking them against, I suppose.
No, that's brilliant. And I suppose in relation to what good looks like, two questions that I kind of focus in all the time in relation to that is, if I'm planning my session, I'm thinking, right, if I'm actually watching myself plan this session, what would I see? So what would I see the coach do? What would I see the players do? And then what would I hear them say? So I'm thinking about, okay, this is the drill I'm going to plan. What questions are going to support that learning? So is it an open question? Do I need a closed question here? So what am I going to hear myself say, and then what do I want the players to give back to me to show that they're learning? And for me, that's what good looks like. So brilliant on them, Brian. Thank you. I suppose progressions and regressions, you've touched on this point earlier again tonight. I don't know if some people may have heard of the STEP model, which is in our coaching cricket and our coaching kid logbooks. It helps in modifying a drill. So if we want to modify a drill, it means we want to progress it, so bring it forward. But as Brian mentioned, in the school environment, we might want to regress it depending on the playing level. So this is the STEP model. So we've got space, time, equipment, and players. And then one that I bring in from other sports is the rules as well. So Brian, if you want to talk on this.
Yeah, I think that, well, the STEP model, it's something that's on the coach education. So most people here who've done a Cricket Ireland course at some stage will know the STEP. The rules one is probably the thing it's probably worth talking about. The rules for me doesn't mean here's the rules of cricket. We must play the 5-day form rules of cricket all the time, and all the rules apply. The rules mean whatever you set out at the start of that session. So if you're playing a small sided game, it's setting the rules that could challenge them to do whatever you need them to do at the stage. And then the games, you can almost just make them up and add rules to make it tougher for them, or add rules just to keep it safe, or add rules to fit whatever target you really require.
No, that's brilliant, Brian. So again, when I'm planning my session, usually on the side of the page, I will write the stepper model, so I know if one drill is going to plan or not going to plan. Instead of changing and moving to plan B, I just need to change one of these. So make the space bigger or smaller, make the time longer or shorter, different equipment. So if I'm working in a skills environment, I always have a tennis racket in the bag just in case. Players wise, I tend to have really short lines, but obviously depending on how many coaches you have as well. And as you mentioned already, the rules, Brian, that's brilliant. So Brian has kindly tonight shared some lessons plans with us. So we're going to talk through a few of them now. And I suppose, Brian, this is probably a very basic plan that we'll see in coaching kids and coaching cricket. I'm not sure if you want to touch on any of them or move on to the next one.
Yeah, well, I think from just looking at it, it's pretty self-explanatory. It pretty much gives you a step-by-step guide. It gives you like a real structure of what's going on. It even tells you like your warm-up whenever the rest is. But yeah, I think that one's pretty self-explanatory. That's the one from the coaching manuals.
Perfect. So Brian has kindly shared these two lesson plans. So if I'm right, Brian, the one on the left, this is the schools one.
Yeah. So this one is, whether you can read the content or not, I suppose it probably doesn't really matter. But what you can see is the headings are probably the most, possibly the most important part. So it's all the stepper stuff is in there, I suppose. So you'll know from your age group who they are really. The sessions, how long you've got with them, so you can know what you do with your time and all the rest. Your equipment, you know what you'll have or what you need for this exact session. One thing that doesn't exist in some session plans is here. So here's the session outcomes. This is what that will provide for the players. But what I what I'm a big advocate of is what the coaches are getting also from the session. So for a coach, I don't think a coach, what always happens for coaching sometimes is you get so caught up on delivering. So you're doing here's what we do, here's how we're doing it. I'm overly doing that. So, but you don't often get that time to reflect. So this actual session plan go right for me as a coach. I may only work on my demonstrations, and maybe provide clear instructions or whatever. So this one here, for this coach, suppose their session outcomes to provide clear instruction, and to observe activity levels. So this is a schoolyard one. So that's what they wanted to do. So as the session went, as the session finished, they can look back and go, as a coach, did I provide clear instructions, or were people confused, or were people full of activity? And I could see that and not document it, but make a mental note of that. Or could I not tell you? Could I not tell you the answer to that?
That's fantastic. It's actually something that I don't have on my own session plan. So that's a nugget I'm going to take away from this, Brian. So session outcomes and coaching outcomes, fantastic. So then if we look on the one on the right hand side, which is an under 17 session that you had planned, and then I suppose the standout one for me is the outcome checklist. Would you like to elaborate on that one?
Yeah, so you'll see these are massively different, and these times are also likely to change. And even the stations are there. The only so if I'm going to start from the picture first, because I'm a sort of visual learner in a way. So the picture is not obviously rocket science. That's just done on Microsoft Word or whatever. But that's in I think that was done in Floyd College. So it's a fairly big hall. But what we were squeezing in was eight stations. Was it 9 stations? So we have 9 stations that are going at the one time. But for me to share that with my assistant coaches, then it was I really needed to go, right, here's how we're generally going to do it. So when one of us was doing the warm-up, that means the other, whoever it would have been, so we don't always assign a role for you're doing what or whatever. So whoever would have been setting up next would have known exactly what to do. So as the warm-up was finishing, everyone knew that everything would be set up and pretty much ready to go by that stage. The outcome checklist, I've used this for ages. Sometimes you don't tick it off. So what we're looking at is, by the end of the session, and this one here, to understand. So we obviously worked on batting first, so I was playing straight, catching from different positions. Then we obviously had our drill work would have come in after, and then a test of stock ball and batting straight in the net. So that was stuff based on what we had done in previous weeks. So what we were trying to do then is get the answer back from the players pretty much, so they understand the importance of catching in different positions, and the different type of catch you're likely to get depending on where you're going to be. So I suppose with this group, we want them not to be specialists in any position in particular, but to be really comfortable with a lot of positions, but really know if they're the person who put their hands up to stand and slip, that the types of catches they're going to get are going to be pretty quick generally. So we try to mimic this here, and then they weren't just saying, so these stations, to really get home, I suppose, the importance of catching these different positions. It wasn't just setting up a station, say, there you go, there's 9 stations, away you go, enjoy yourself. It was really picking their brains first and going, what do you expect from where you are here, or in the skill here, where are you likely to take these types of catches, and then find out if it's something a place they usually field anyway. So as you see, it's just, it gives us a theme of what to work on, and I don't believe that batting workshop down the bottom or anything like that.
So in other words, you had a bit of flexibility within your training sessions, which is fantastic, Brian. So
Yeah.
I suppose from my own point of view, the two kind of nuggets that I'm going to take away is the session outcomes, which I normally have, but coaching outcomes from the left-hand side, and then an outcome checklist.
Yeah.
And if anybody else sees anything within that they'd like to take away, please use the chat function. We'd love if you see something that you will take away and use within your own session planning. I think the best coaches are the best stealers. I learn from other coaches all the time, whether it's online or going and watching sessions, and you're stealing something that they use. I know I can use that with a particular group, so please feel free to share what you're going to take away. So that kind of, I suppose, brings us nicely on to nested planning, Brian. And I suppose this is one of yours if you want to bring us through it.
Yeah, well, the content, I suppose, I'll let you read the content. That's this isn't my actual part, so I didn't actually design this here, but it's just it's from one of the courses we've done recently, and it's really interesting. But for me, it's just pretty much for a coach, is how they, I suppose, challenge and make sure the players are getting the appropriate stuff at the appropriate time or at the right time. So this nested plan here, so you can see on your, if you take it as a journey, so you as a coach are taking the players to destination A. Along the road, you're going to have to make stops for whatever reason, but it's going to be for the reason that the players need. So in here, you can see in your sessions, you'll have things that you need to make sure a checklist. Let's go for a checklist. So the checklist by the end, they're going to play their competition. They need to be really good at, let's say, batting for long periods of time, facing spin ball, being able to bowl quick, being able to bowl to field, and being able to catch the ball or something. So if we go right, what's the very first one we need to get right? Let's just pick. Let's just say as a coach, this group needs to really nail catching before we can do anything else. Then our nested plan for a chunk of, so on our journey of coaching them towards this tournament, we're going to go way over here and really focus on coaching catching for a good chunk of it. But and then coming back onto your path and sort of moving again. So for this here, it's just pretty much going right. How do we build this into our cycle as a coach? So we've got 3 months to get them ready. Here's all the things we need to do. How do we chunk it to make sure that we can focus on specific areas and really drive home some learning for those players that fits our program, as opposed to just doing wee bits of everything all the time and hoping it sticks. So it's, for this year, it's just, you can see how that one's done. So that's like a week example going into like your low season, and then your timeline of where it fits in the year. So it's just helped to cut chunks into from your coaching journey, I suppose, with that team or that player.
No, I suppose that's fantastic, especially for those who plan their season, which is something I tend to do. So before preseason even begins, we start from our end point. We want to be at the last game of the season, and we work backwards in relation to our planning. But then, as you say, at stages during the year, we're going to have to focus on specific stuff. And it's great the way this illustration shows us exactly how to do that. So thanks for sharing, Brian. And I suppose it brings us nicely into our next cycle. So I know I use this in an awful lot of coach education modules, and we usually put this up as our first slide, in fairness. And Brian, I know, has seen this previously, guys, and he said, it's in the wrong order, Stephen. But what we tend to find is when we show this to coaches, they don't spend an awful lot of time planning. So that's why do is at the top. They just go out and coach. And it is a cycle. So the starting point for us as coaches really should be, if it's pre-season, it's planning. So planning kind of can rotate and move to the top. We'll go and do our coaching. We'll reflect on our coaching. And my reflection is usually 5 minutes at the end of the session, talking to the coaches, going home in the car and using my voice notes and talking to myself. Not with my phone in my hand, by the way. And then analyze the session and then plan again for the next one based on our periodized plan. Is there anything you'd like to touch on in relation to that cycle, Brian?
I think sometimes coaches could probably yo-yo between plan and do. It's really, I suppose, easy to do that, because if you're so busy, the chances to reflect properly is tough at times. And sometimes you don't always allow that time or have that time to do it. So I suppose the reflection doesn't need to be like essays or anything. It could just be it could just be a general reflection of the night. So if you looked at your checklist in the past, your reflection might be just looking at that going, did we hit all those things? Are we confident that they know enough about that? How can I check that that's actually the case? And if you don't have the answer to any of your checklist, then so in your next part, when you're analyzing, you're probably right. If I didn't know the answer to that, how am I going to change my session so I can definitely get the answer to that next time? And then your reflection doesn't always come into what they've done. It's now you're looking at yourself as a coach going, how do I understand that they've actually grasped this? Like, what type of language am I using, or what communication methods are we doing? Or how am I going to am I just going to watch it and see? So it's just allowing yourself that chance, and it doesn't need to take long.
Brilliant. And I suppose we're going to touch on reflection now in a moment as well. But before we get there, just so we get everybody back involved tonight, so we're gonna throw out two scenarios to everybody here. So again, if you jump on the chat function here. So if we look at the first scenario, okay, so an injury has occurred mid-session. We started with 2 coaches. One is now treating the injury, leaving you alone with 15 participants. So what would you do as a coach? So if everybody could just take a moment and start typing into the chat, and obviously, Brian, I'm going to throw this scenario at you, and I'll probably give you a time scale because we're going to jump on to scenario 2 in a moment. So I'll give you a minute to share some insights on what would you do in this situation.
It would depend on, I've had this one before a few times. Well, it would depend on the type of injury. If there's probably the likes of, I don't know, if you had blood or whatever hitting the floor, then what the second coach would need to do is make sure you divert all the attention away from the incident area, and find activity. Even you're using that time to question them of some things that are required. And until the other coach gets a chance to see what's going on. I think the one thing we're really wary of is everything stopping and 2 coaches focusing on the injury straight away, whereas 5 other injuries, depending on your group now, 5 other injuries might happen behind you when you're not looking. So it's trying to, as we went back to the start, as I can't remember who typed it in, is keeping your environment safe. Now, hopefully on reflection, the injury is not something that was because of the coach, the way it was set up. Hopefully it was just something that happened. But for me is to try and make sure that the rest of the group are impacted as little as possible, but the injured person is kept safe.
Brilliant. And then Emma, great insight there. So split the group of 15 into smaller groups with a task or a game. Identify one player to lead and then oversee the groups and continue coaching. Fantastic. Thanks for sharing, Emma. That's brilliant. If anybody else has an insight on what you do in that scenario, please do share. And I'm going to hit Brian with another scenario. So scenario 2, Brian. You've planned your session for under 15s in detail, but participants are acting up, so they're taking, they're not enjoying their session. They're all over the shop. Discuss what might be happening here. Why is it happening?
Yeah, I know if this happened to me, first thing that will come into my head is, what have I done to make this happen? Is it my fault? Like, so if I just given them activities to do that without actually explaining what they're at, and then they've just run a bit riot. But anyway, we have to rescue the situation. So what I would obviously stop what they're doing, get them in an activity that's probably, or possibly high energy, that they can get to run off some of that steam. That I've got a few fun warm-ups that I always revert back to on occasions like this, that are really good games or good fun generally. But it's just trying to nip that in the bud before you've lost.
That's brilliant, Brian. And again, if anybody has an answer to scenario 2, please share within the group. Christina has one there for scenario 1. So if we're in a split drill, given it's mid-season, have them set up close together or adapt the drill so that they can do it alone or get them into a match altogether. Brilliant. I suppose if we put them into a fun game, it's much easier to handle everybody all at once. So thanks for sharing, Christina. So we'll move on then from our scenario. So we looked at the plan, do, analyze, review model, and an awful lot of it is based on reflecting, Brian. I think it's a very important aspect of coaching that an awful lot of people don't do enough of. So, guys, in the top right hand corner is kind of the coaching process there, and I'll let you look at that yourself. So, what is reflective practice? It's described as a form of problem solving that is used to resolve issues in a practical context. This simply looks like, why did this occur in my session? Reflection is the tool that guides the coach to understanding why and how this happened. So I suppose at times I'm very guilty of reflecting too long on a session, or it could be reflecting on a game, usually when we lose. When we win, I probably don't reflect on it enough. And reflective practice, I suppose, there's an awful lot of work in it, Brian, and I'll just move on from that one just for a moment, and I'll throw up 3 cycles, but I'll let you just jump in there on reflective practice and what it means to you.
Yeah, I think the definition on the page before does obviously hits it in the head, but for me, it's just seeing what you've done, how you can do it better. Like every time you do something, you can always do it better. But and what better looks like is always going to be different for the group. So and that's where the challenge is for me. So it's reflecting on, is the language I use appropriate for the group and in front of me? Are they getting it? Is I making it too hard or making it too easy? And then so that's why I always like the checklist at the end. It's really easy for you to say, have I hit the right targets here? And if not, if I don't have the answers, then how do I find a way as a coach of getting those answers? So for me, I like that checklist.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And I suppose I use the middle one here, the middle model here, Driscoll's reflective model. This is kind of my one. And for me, I love it because it's real short and sharp. So at the end of the session, I have 4 other coaches with me. Okay, guys, what went wrong? What went right? Okay, so what? It went wrong. Why? It went right. Why did it go right? So we have a quick discussion. We have 3 questions. Okay, so went right. What now? Do we progress it more? It went wrong. Okay, so why did it go wrong, and what can we now do based on that? So that's, for me, that's really short and sharp, and that's why I love it as a reflective model when I have the whole group of coaches with me. When I'm on my own, I tend to use the one on the far right hand side, and I can reflect too much. So you get into an awful lot of detail. Okay, what were the kids thinking and feeling? Okay, and then you evaluate that, analyze it, and come to a conclusion. So we've 3 different models there, guys. For time wise, I tend to use the one in the middle. Brian, would you tend to use either of those, or have you got something else in your mind there?
The simplest one possible. Probably the one in the middle. Yeah.
Oh, no, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. And then I suppose another way of using reflection as a tool is reflecting on what the kids or the adults are learning in your environment. And the most simplest way I can do this is using the traffic light system. So I don't know if anybody has used this before. So I actually use this with my 2 adult teams at the moment, and I actually use a Google form that I throw into their WhatsApp group. So they're all 21 plus. So we throw this in at the end of every session, and they take 5 minutes to fill it in. And this is done after every session or every game. And we simply ask them 3 questions. So we put in the word stop, and they know, okay, is there something that happened tonight that's just not working and we shouldn't do it again in practice? Is there something, based on maybe something they've seen during the week, whether it was online, they heard it from someone else, is there something we should start doing and implement into our training sessions? And then the last one, and the most important one, I think, for us as coaches, is continue. What do the kids or the adults enjoy, and what should we continue to do in our coaching? Is that something you've come across before, Brian? Or
Yeah, I've seen it, but I haven't seen it used as the same method you've used it yourself. Where you've sent it out, which it does give you real time feedback on what they need and what they want. But generally, I suppose if you're not using the likes of Google Forms, it's probably trying to get that relationship where people are happy to tell you. I suppose easier face to face as well. If you haven't got time, like to do that. But it's always good to get feedback from the players. It's hard to get it collectively when you ask them as a group, because maybe they don't want to hurt your feelings or whatever.
Exactly.
But it's just getting to that level of trust where everyone's pulling the same way, and it's not a me versus you scenario.
I have another one then that we use in I teach in my niece's primary school at the moment. So her class is 6 years of age. So I go in sometimes and coach cricket as well as hockey. And we have a traffic light system at the end of practice. And green means they loved it, yellow means it was okay, coach, and red means they didn't enjoy it. So what they do is we use their sticky notes and they put their name on it and they stick it either on green, yellow, or red. So it's a great way of me knowing what kids enjoyed it, what kids didn't. And then by the end of the session, I can ask the teacher, okay, what would that child enjoy the next time? And I try bring that into the session to try and involve everybody. So there's different ways we can use the same system depending on the age groups. So based on that, we've reflected, we've gotten some feedback off the players. So what do the players need, Brian? So do you want to elaborate on this one?
Yeah, but this one it's just probably, if you look at most coaching, people probably think, what am I going to do? How am I going to do it? That's generally the two questions as you'll ask yourself as a coach. But very seldom when you ask you why am I doing it in the first place? Like, what's the practice for? And this here for me fits in very well with feedback for players. So you'll generally know what they're doing, what they're like, the players, if they understand what they're doing, brilliant. They'll understand hopefully how they're doing it. So if you as a coach, if you're getting that environment, like how you doing it. But if there's something they really are doing well, or maybe not so well, is if can they understand why that's happening, and can they either start self-correct, or do they need some input from the coach to correct it, and really start to understand why things aren't working. So I suppose here, the how and what for me are like your real procedural knowledge for coach. So here's what to do. Here's how to fix it. So there's your two examples. But then if as a coach you want to really progress them to the next level and really understand what's going on, then it's really sharing with them. Here's why that may be happening. Here's what we can do about it, and here's how to do it. But then what that'll do, if you hit all these three, I suppose, these three circles before the product, then your players will be really in a good place of understanding. Whereas if you really touch on the how and what's most of the time, which I think I know most of my early coaching was always thinking about how am I going to do it, or what am I going to do. As they end up probably getting possibly players overly reliant on coaches where they need them all the time. Whereas if we can start to understand or teach them why things are happening, it takes a bit longer, but then we can really go in a good place.
No, that's brilliant. And I suppose that's kind of brought us full circle here tonight, Brian. You know, we're finishing with the why being one of the most important things in relation to the product. And we started out with our why, so why we're coaching and what that means in relation to our philosophy. So thanks for sharing that. You know, it's brilliant. It's kind of brought us full circle there tonight. So just in relation to our overall, so hopefully everybody on the call tonight, having completed this webinar, is able to take away, you know, did Stephen and Brian tick the boxes for us? So did we identify the requirements of session planning, and we looked at the pros and cons? And I suppose time is probably the biggest one. Everybody has busy lives. We looked at how to apply coaching considerations to session planning. So, you know, we're youth coaches. What do we need to consider for the kids? We're coaching adults. What should we consider? And then lastly, employing reflective practice to support session planning. And we showed you there 3 different cycles, but like we can make it as simple or as hard as we want based on our own time constraints. So before we finish up, everybody, I suppose, you know, does anybody have a question is what most people say, but, you know, how we communicate is very important. So what questions would you like to ask to Brian or myself based on the webinar tonight? So if you guys have any questions, just before we finish up, if you throw them into the chat box or you throw them into the Q&A, and I'll level them at Brian there. And we'll keep him on his toes for a minute or two more just before we finish. Other than that, I'd just like to thank everybody for jumping on board tonight. I'll give you a moment there to type into the chat box.